A Passage to India. Novel by E.M. Forster. Chapter 35. Long before he discovered Mao, another young Mohammedan had retired there, a saint. His mother said to him, "Free prisoners." So he took a sword and went up to the fort. He unlocked a door, and the prisoners streamed out and resumed their previous occupations. But the police were too much annoyed and cut off the young man's head. Ignoring its absence, he made his way over the rocks that separate the fort and the town, killing policemen as he went, and he fell outside his mother's house, having accomplished her orders. Consequently there are two shrines to him today, that of the head above, and that of the body below, and they are worshipped by the few Mohammedans who live near, and by Hindus also. There is no God but God. That symmetrical injunction melts in the mild airs of Mao. It belongs to pilgrimages and universities, not to feudalism and agriculture. When Aziz arrived, and found that even Islam was idolatrous, he grew scornful, and longed to purify the place, like Alamgir. But soon he didn't mind, like Akbar. After all, this saint had freed prisoners, and he himself had lain in prison. The shrine of the body lay in his own garden and produced a weekly crop of lamps and flowers, and when he saw them he recalled his sufferings. The shrine of the head made a nice short walk for the children. He was off duty the morning after the great booyah, and he told them to come. Jamila held his hand. Ahmed and Karim ran in front, arguing what the body looked like as it came staggering down, and whether they would have been frightened if they met it. He didn't want them to grow up superstitious. So he rebuked them, and they answered yes, father. For they were well brought up, but, like himself, they were impervious to argument, and after a polite pause they continued saying what their natures compelled them to say. A slim, tall eight-sided building stood at the top of the slope, among some bushes. This was the shrine of the head. It had not been roofed, and was indeed merely a screen. Inside it crouched a humble dome. And inside that, visible through a grille, was a truncated gravestone, swathed in calico. The inner angles of the screen were cumbered with bees' nests, and a gentle shower of broken wings and other aerial oddments kept falling, and had strewn the damp pavement with their flew. Ahmed, apprised by Muhammad Latif of the character of the bee, said, "They will not hurt us, whose lives are chaste," and pushed boldly in. His sister was more cautious. From the shrine they went to a mosque, which, in size and design, resembled a fire screen. The arcades of Chandrapur had shrunk to a flat piece of ornamental stucco, with protuberances at either end to suggest minarets. The funny little thing didn't even stand straight, for the rock on which it had been put was slipping down the hill. It, and the shrine, were a strange outcome of the protests of Arabia. They wandered over the old fort, now deserted, and admired the various views. The scenery, according to their standards, was delightful, the sky grey and black, bellyfuls of rain all over it, the earth pocked with pools of water and slimy with mud. A magnificent monsoon, the best for 3 years, the tanks already full, bumper crops possible. Out towards the river, the route by which the Fieldings had escaped from Deora, the downpour had been enormous, the mails had to be pulled across by ropes. They could just see the break in the forest trees where the gorge came through, and the rocks above that marked the site of the diamond mine, glistening with wet. Close beneath was the suburban residence of the junior Rani, isolated by floods, and Her Highness, lax about Purda, to be seen paddling with her handmaidens in the garden and waving her sari at the monkeys on the roof. But better not look close beneath, perhaps, nor towards the European guest house either. Beyond the guest house rose another grey-green gloom of hills, covered with temples like little white flames. There were over 200 gods in that direction alone, who visited each other constantly, and owned numerous cows, and all the betel leaf industry, besides having shares in the Asurja motor omnibus. Many of them were in the palace at this moment, having the time of their lives. Others, too large or proud to travel, had sent symbols to represent them. The air was thick with religion and rain. their white shirts fluttering. Ahmed and Karim ran about over the fort, shrieking with joy. Presently they intersected a line of prisoners, who were looking aimlessly at an old bronze gun. "Which of you is to be pardoned?" they asked. For tonight was the procession of the chief god, when he would leave the palace, escorted by the whole power of the state, and pass by the jail, which stood down in the town now. As he did so, troubling the waters of our civilization, one prisoner would be released, and then he would proceed to the great mountank that stretched as far as the guest house garden, where something else would happen, some final or subsidiary apotheosis. After which he would submit to the experience of sleep. The Aziz family did not grasp as much as this, being Muslim. But the visit to the jail was common knowledge. Smiling, with downcast eyes, the prisoners discussed with the gentry their chances of salvation. Except for the irons on their legs, they resembled other men, nor did they feel different. 5 of them, who had not yet been brought to trial, could expect no pardon. But all who had been convicted were full of hope. They did not distinguish between the god and the Raja in their minds, both were too far above them, but the guard was better educated, and ventured to inquire after His Highness's health. "It always improves," replied the medicine man. As a matter of fact, the Raja was dead. The ceremony overnight had overtaxed his strength. His death was being concealed lest the glory of the festival were dimmed. The Hindu physician, the private secretary, and a confidential servant remained with the corpse. While Aziz had assumed the duty of being seen in public, and misleading people. He had liked the ruler very much, and might not prosper under his successor, yet he could not worry over such problems yet, for he was involved in the illusion he helped to create. The children continued to run about, hunting for a frog to put in Muhammad Latif's bed, the little fools. Hundreds of frogs lived in their own garden, but they must needs catch one up on the fort. They reported 2 topis below. Fielding and his brother-in-law, instead of resting after their journey, were climbing the slope to the saint's tomb. "Throw stones?" asked Karim. "Put powdered glass in their pan? Ahmed, come here for such wickedness." He raised his hand to smite his firstborn, but allowed it to be kissed instead. It was sweet to have his sons with him at this moment, and to know they were affectionate and brave. He pointed out that the Englishmen were state guests, so must not be poisoned, and received, as always, gentle yet enthusiastic assent to his words. The 2 visitors entered the octagon, but rushed out at once pursued by some bees. Hither and thither they ran, beating their heads. The children shrieked with derision, and out of heaven, as if a plug had been pulled, fell a jolly dollop of rain. Aziz had not meant to greet his former friend, but the incident put him into an excellent temper. He felt compact and strong. He shouted out, "Hello, gentlemen, are you in trouble?" The brother-in-law exclaimed, "A bee had got him." "Lie down in a pool of water, my dear sir, here are plenty. Don't come near me. I cannot control them, they are state bees." Complain to His Highness of their behavior. There was no real danger, for the rain was increasing. The swarm retired to the shrine. He went up to the stranger and pulled a couple of stings out of his wrist, remarking, "Come, pull yourself together and be a man." "How do you do, Aziz, after all this time? I heard you were settled in here." Fielding called to him, but not in friendly tones. "I suppose a couple of stings don't signify." "Not the least. I'll send an embrocation over to the guest house. I heard you were settled in there. Why have you not answered my letters?" he asked, going straight for the point, but not reaching it, owing to buckets of rain. His companion, new to the country, cried, as the drops drummed on his topi, that the bees were renewing their attack. Fielding checked his antics rather sharply, then said, "Is there a short cut down to our carriage? We must give up our walk. The weather's pestilential." "Yes. That way. Are you not coming down yourself?" Aziz sketched a comic salam. Like all Indians, he was skillful in the slighter impertinences. "I tremble, I obey," the gesture said, and it was not lost upon Fielding. They walked down a rough path to the road, the two men first, the brother-in-law, boy rather than man, next, in a state over his arm, which hurt, the three Indian children last, noisy and impudent, all 6 wet through. "How goes it, Aziz?" "In my usual health." "Are you making anything out of your life here?" "How much do you make out of yours?" "Who is in charge of the guest house?" he asked, giving up his slight effort to recapture their intimacy, and growing more official. He was older and sterner. "His Highness's private secretary, probably." "Where is he, then?" "I don't know. Because not a soul's been near us since we arrived." "Really?" "I wrote beforehand to the Durbar, and asked if a visit was convenient. I was told it was, and arranged my tour accordingly, but the guest house servants appear to have no definite instructions. We can't get any eggs, also my wife wants to go out in the boat." "There are 2 boats." "Exactly, and no oars." "Colonel Maggs broke the oars when here last." "All 4? He is a most powerful man. If the weather lifts, we want to see your torchlight procession from the water this evening," he pursued. "I wrote to God Belay about it, but he has taken no notice. It's a place of the dead. Perhaps your letter never reached the minister in question. Will there be any objection to English people watching the procession? I know nothing at all about the religion here. I should never think of watching it myself." We had a very different reception both at Mudcall and Deora. They were kindness itself at Deora. The Maharaja and Maharani wanted us to see everything. You should never have left them. "Jump in, Ralph." They had reached the carriage. "Jump in, Mr. Quested, and Mr. Fielding." "Who on earth is Mr. Quested? Do I mispronounce that well-known name? Is he not your wife's brother? Who on earth do you suppose I've married?" "I'm only Ralph Moore," said the boy, blushing, and at that moment there fell another pailful of the rain, and made a mist round their feet. Aziz tried to withdraw, but it was too late. "Quested? Quested? Don't you know that my wife was Mrs. Moore's daughter?" He trembled, and went purplish-grey. He hated the news, hated hearing the name Moore. "Perhaps this explains your odd attitude?" "And pray what is wrong with my attitude?" "The preposterous letter you allowed Mahmoud Ali to write for you. This is a very useless conversation, I consider." "However did you make such a mistake?" said Fielding, more friendly than before. But scathing and scornful. "It's almost unbelievable. I should think I wrote you half a dozen times, mentioning my wife by name." "Miss Quested. What an extraordinary notion." From his smile, Aziz guessed that Stella was beautiful. "Miss Quested is our best friend, she introduced us, but, what an amazing notion. Aziz, we must thrash this misunderstanding out later on. It is clearly some devilry of Mahmoud Ali's. He knows perfectly well I married Miss Moore. He called her Heslop's sister in his insolent letter to me. The name woke furies in him. So she is, and here is Heslop's brother. And you his brother-in-law, and goodbye." Shame turned into a rage that brought back his self-respect. "What does it matter to me who you marry? Don't trouble me here at Mao is all I ask. I do not want you, I do not want one of you in my private life. With my dying breath I say it. Yes, yes, I made a foolish blunder, despise me and feel cold. I thought you married my enemy. I never read your letter. Mahmoud Ali deceived me. I thought you'd stolen my money." But he clapped his hands together, and his children gathered round him. "It's as if you stole it. I forgive Mahmoud Ali all things, because he loved me." Then pausing, while the rain exploded like pistols, he said, "My heart is for my own people henceforward," and turned away. Cyril followed him through the mud, apologizing, laughing a little, wanting to argue and reconstruct, pointing out with irrefragable logic that he had married, not Heslop's betrothed, but Heslop's sister. What difference did it make at this hour of the day? He had built his life on a mistake, but he had built it. Speaking in Urdu, that the children might understand, he said, "Please do not follow us, whomever you marry. I wish no Englishman or Englishwoman to be my friend." He returned to the house excited and happy. It had been an uneasy, uncanny moment when Mrs. Moore's name was mentioned, stirring memories. Mrs. Moore, as though she was coming to help him. She had always been so good, and that youth whom he had scarcely looked at was her son, Ralph Moore, Stella, and Ralph, whom he had promised to be kind to, and Stella had married Cyril. End of the chapter. Now, let's listen to Chapter 36. All the time the palace ceased not to thrum and tum-tum. The revelation was over, but its effect lasted, and its effect was to make men feel that the revelation had not yet come. Hope existed despite fulfillment. As it will be in heaven. Although the God had been born, his procession, loosely supposed by many to be the birth, had not taken place. In normal years, the middle hours of this day were signalized by performances of great beauty in the private apartments of the Rajah. He owned a consecrated troop of men and boys, whose duty it was to dance various actions and meditations of his faith before him. Seated at his ease, he could witness the 3 steps by which the Saviour ascended the universe to the discomfiture of Indra. Also the death of the dragon, the mountain that turned into an umbrella, and the soldier who, with comic results, invoked the god before dining. All culminated in the dance of the milk-maidens before Krishna. And in the still greater dance of Krishna before the milk-maidens, when the music and the musicians swirled through the dark blue robes of the actors into their tinsel crowns, and all became one. The Rajah and his guests would then forget that this was a dramatic performance, and would worship the actors. Nothing of the sort could occur today, because death interrupts. It interrupted less here than in Europe, its pathos was less poignant, its irony less cruel. There were 2 claimants to the throne, unfortunately, who were in the palace now and suspected what had happened. Yet they made no trouble, because religion is a living force to the Hindus, and can at certain moments fling down everything that is petty and temporary in their natures. The festival flowed on, wild and sincere, and all men loved each other, and avoided by instinct whatever could cause inconvenience or pain. Aziz could not understand this, any more than an average Christian could. He was puzzled that Mao should suddenly be purged from suspicion and self-seeking. Although he was an outsider, and excluded from their rights, they were always particularly charming to him at this time. He and his household received small courtesies and presents, just because he was outside. He had nothing to do all day, except to send the embarkation over to the guest house. And towards sunset he remembered it, and looked round his house for a local palliative, for the dispensary was shut. He found a tin of ointment belonging to Muhammad Latif, who was unwilling it should be removed. For magic words had been spoken over it while it was being boiled down, but Aziz promised that he would bring it back after application to the stings. He wanted an excuse for a ride. The procession was beginning to form as he passed the palace. A large crowd watched the loading of the state palanquin, the prow of which protruded in the form of a silver dragon's head through the lofty half-opened door. Gods, big and little, were getting aboard. He averted his eyes, for he never knew how much he was supposed to see, and nearly collided with the Minister of Education. "Ah, you might make me late," meaning that the touch of a non-Hindu would necessitate another bath. The words were spoken without moral heat. "Sorry," said Aziz. The others smiled, and again mentioned the guest house party, and when he heard that Fielding's wife was not Miss Quested after all, remarked, "Ah, no, he married the sister of Mr. Heaslop." "Ah, exactly, I have known that for over a year also without heat. Why did you not tell me? Your silence plunged me into a pretty pickle." Goad Billy, who had never been known to tell anyone anything, smiled again, and said in deprecating tones, "Never be angry with me. I am, as far as my limitations permit, your true friend. Besides, it is my holy festival." Aziz always felt like a baby in that strange presence, a baby who unexpectedly receives a toy. He smiled also, and turned his horse into a lane, for the crush increased. The sweepers' band was arriving. Playing on sieves and other emblems of their profession, they marched straight at the gate of the palace with the air of a victorious army. All other music was silent, for this was ritually the moment of the despised and rejected. The god could not issue from his temple until the unclean sweepers played their tune. They were the spot of filth without which the spirit cannot cohere. For an instant the scene was magnificent. The doors were thrown open, and the whole court was seen inside, barefoot and dressed in white robes. In the fairway stood the Ark of the Lord, covered with cloth of gold and flanked by peacock fans and by stiff circular banners of crimson. It was full to the brim with statuettes and flowers. As it rose from the earth on the shoulders of its bearers, the friendly sun of the monsoons shone forth and flooded the world with color, so that the yellow tigers painted on the palace walls seemed to spring, and pink and green skeins of cloud to link up the upper sky. The palanquin moved. The lane was full of state elephants, who would follow it, their howdahs empty out of humility. Aziz did not pay attention to these sanctities, for they had no connection with his own. He felt bored, slightly cynical, like his own dear Emperor Babur, who came down from the north and found in Hindustan no good fruit, no fresh water or witty conversation, not even a friend. The lane led quickly out of the town onto high rocks and jungle. Here he drew rein and examined the great Mautank, which lay exposed beneath him to its remotest curve, reflecting the evening clouds. It filled the nether world with an equal splendor, so that earth and sky leant toward one another, about to clash in ecstasy. He spat, cynical again. More cynical than before. For in the center of the burnished circle a small black blot was advancing, the guest house boat. Those English had improvised something to take the place of oars, and were proceeding in their work of patrolling India. The sight endeared the Hindus by comparison, and looking back at the milk-white hump of the palace, he hoped that they would enjoy carrying their idol about, for at all events it did not pry into other people's lives. This pose of seeing India, which had seduced him to misquested at Chandrapur, was only a form of ruling India. No sympathy lay behind it. He knew exactly what was going on in the boat as the party gazed at the steps down which the image would presently descend, and debated how near they might row without getting into trouble officially. He did not give up his ride, for there would be servants at the guest house whom he could question. A little information never comes amiss. He took the path by the somber promontory that contained the royal tombs. Like the palace, they were of snowy stucco, and gleamed by their internal light, but their radiance grew ghostly under approaching night. The promontory was covered with lofty trees, and the fruit bats were unhooking from the boughs and making kissing sounds as they grazed the surface of the tank. Hanging upside down all the day, they had grown thirsty. The signs of the contented Indian evening multiplied: frogs on all sides, cow dung burning eternally, a flock of belated hornbills overhead, looking like winged skeletons as they flapped across the gloaming. There was death in the air, but not sadness. A compromise had been made between destiny and desire, and even the heart of man acquiesced. The European guest house stood 200 feet above the water, on the crest of a rocky and wooded spur that jutted from the jungle. By the time Aziz arrived, the water had paled to a film of mauve grey, and the boat vanished entirely. A sentry slept in the guest house porch, lamps burned in the cruciform of the deserted rooms. He went from one room to another, inquisitive and malicious. 2 letters lying on the piano rewarded him, and he pounced and read them promptly. He was not ashamed to do this. The sanctity of private correspondence has never been ratified by the East. Moreover, Mr. McBride had read all his letters in the past, and spread their contents. One letter, the more interesting of the two, was from Heaslop to Fielding. It threw light on the mentality of his former friend, and it hardened him further against him. Much of it was about Ralph Moore, who appeared to be almost an imbecile. Hand on my brother whenever suits you. I write to you because he is sure to make a bad bundabust. Then, I quite agree, life is too short to cherish grievances. Also I'm relieved you feel able to come into line with the oppressors of India to some extent. We need all the support we can get. I hope that next time Stella comes my way she will bring you with her. when I will make you as comfortable as a bachelor can. It's certainly time we met. My sister's marriage to you coming after my mother's death and my own difficulties did upset me. And I was unreasonable. It is about time we made it up properly, as you say. Let us leave it at faults on both sides. Glad about your son and heir. When next any of you write to Agala, do give her some sort of message from me, for I should like to make my peace with her too. You are lucky to be out of British India at the present moment. Incident after incident, all due to propaganda, but we can't lay our hands on the connecting thread. The longer one lives here, the more certain one gets that everything hangs together. My personal opinion is, it's the Jews. Thus far the red-nosed boy. Aziz was distracted for a moment by blurred sounds coming from over the water. The procession was underway. The second letter was from Miss Quested to Mrs. Fielding. It contained one or two interesting touches. The writer hoped that Ralph will enjoy his India more than I did mine, and appeared to have given him money for this purpose, my debt which I shall never repay in person. What debt did Miss Quested imagine she owed the country? He did not relish the phrase. Talk of Ralph's health. It was all Stella and Ralph, even Cyril and Ronnie, all so friendly and sensible, and written in a spirit he could not command. He envied the easy intercourse that is only possible in a nation whose women are free. These 5 people were making up their little difficulties, and closing their broken ranks against the alien. Even Heaslop was coming in. Hence the strength of England, and in a spurt of temper he hit the piano. And since the notes had swollen and stuck together in groups of 3s, he produced a remarkable noise. "Oh, who is that?" said a nervous and respectful voice. He could not remember where he had heard its tones before. Something moved in the twilight of an adjoining room. He replied. State doctor, ridden over to inquire, very little English. Slipped the letters into his pocket, and to show that he had free entry to the guest house, struck the piano again. Ralph Moore came into the light. What a strange-looking youth, tall, prematurely aged, the big blue eyes faded with anxiety, the hair impoverished and tousled. Not a type that is often exported imperially. The doctor in Aziz thought, born of too old a mother, the poet found him rather beautiful. I was unable to call earlier owing to pressure of work. How are the celebrated beestings? He asked patronizingly. I was resting, they thought I had better, they throb rather. His timidity and evident newness had complicated effects on the malcontent. Speaking threateningly, he said, "Come here, please, allow me to look." They were practically alone, and he could treat the patient as Calendar had treated Nurdin. "You said this morning. The best of doctors make mistakes. Come here, please, for the diagnosis under the lamp. I am pressed for time." "Oh. What is the matter, pray? Your hands are unkind." He started and glanced down at them. The extraordinary youth was right. And he put them behind his back before replying with outward anger. "What the devil have my hands to do with you? This is a most strange remark. I am a qualified doctor, who will not hurt you. I don't mind pain, there is no pain." "No pain? Not really." "Excellent news," sneered Aziz. "But there is cruelty. I have brought you some salve, but how to put it on in your present nervous state becomes a problem," he continued, after a pause. "Please leave it with me." "Certainly not. It returns to my dispensary at once." He stretched forward. And the other retreated to the farther side of a table. "Now, do you want me to treat your stings, or do you prefer an English doctor? There is one at Asurja. Asurja is 40 miles away, and the ring no dam broken. Now you see how you are placed. I think I had better see Mr. Fielding about you. This is really great nonsense, your present behavior." "They are out in a boat," he replied, glancing about him for support. Aziz feigned intense surprise. "They have not gone in the direction of Mao, I hope." On a night like this the people become most fanatical. And, as if to confirm him, there was a sob, As though the lips of a giant had parted, the procession was approaching the jail. "You should not treat us like this," he challenged, and this time Aziz was checked. For the voice, though frightened, was not weak. "Like what?" "Dr. Aziz, we have done you no harm." "Aha, you know my name, I see." "Yes, I am Aziz." "No, of course your great friend Miss Quested did me no harm at the Marabar." Drowning his last words, all the guns of the state went off. A rocket from the jail garden gave the signal. The prisoner had been released and was kissing the feet of the singers. Rose leaves fall from the houses, sacred spices and coconut are brought forth. It was the halfway moment, the god had extended his temple, and paused exultantly. Mixed and confused in their passage, the rumors of salvation entered the guest house. They were startled and moved on to the porch, drawn by the sudden illumination. The bronze gun upon the fort kept flashing, the town was a blur of light, in which the houses seemed dancing, and the palace waving little wings. The water below, the hills and sky above, were not involved as yet. There was still only a little light and song struggling among the shapeless lumps of the universe. The song became audible through much repetition, the choir was repeating and inverting the names of deities. Radha Krishna Radha Krishna. Radha Krishna Radha Krishna. Krishna Radha Radha Krishna. Radha Krishna Radha Krishna. They sang, and woke the sleeping sentry in the guest house. He leant upon his iron-tipped spear. "I must go back now, good night," said Aziz. And held out his hand, completely forgetting that they were not friends, and focusing his heart on something more distant than the caves. Something beautiful. His hand was taken, and then he remembered how detestable he had been, and said gently, "Don't you think me unkind any more?" "No." "How can you tell, you strange fellow?" "Not difficult, the one thing I always know." "Can you always tell whether a stranger is your friend?" "Yes." "Then you are an Oriental." He unclasped as he spoke, with a little shudder. Those words, he had said them to Mrs. Moore in the mosque in the beginning of the cycle, from which, after so much suffering, he had got free. Never be friends with the English. Mosque, caves, mosque, caves. And here he was starting again. He handed the magic ointment to him. "Take this. Think of me when you use it. I shall never want it back. I must give you one little present, and it is all I have got. You are Mrs. Moore's son." "I am that," he murmured to himself, and a part of Aziz's mind that had been hidden seemed to move and force its way to the top. "But you are Hyslop's brother also, and alas, the two nations cannot be friends." "I know. Not yet." "Did your mother speak to you about me?" "Yes." And with the swerve of voice and body that Aziz did not follow he added, in her letters. She loved you." "Yes, your mother was my best friend in all the world." He was silent, puzzled by his own great gratitude. What did this eternal goodness of Mrs. Moore amount to? To nothing, if brought to the test of thought. She had not borne witness in his favor, nor visited him in the prison, yet she had stolen to the depths of his heart, and he always adored her. "This is our monsoon, the best weather," he said, while the lights of the procession waved as though embroidered on an agitated curtain. "How I wish she could have seen them, our rains. Now is the time when all things are happy, young and old. They are happy out there with their savage noise, though we cannot follow them. The tanks are all full so they dance, and this is India. I wish you were not with officials, then I would show you my country, but I cannot. Perhaps I will just take you out on the water now, for one short half hour." Was the cycle beginning again? His heart was too full to draw back. He must slip out in the darkness, and do this one act of homage to Mrs. Moore's son. He knew where the oars were, hidden to deter the visitors from going out, and he brought the second bear, in case they met the other boat. The Fieldings had pushed themselves out with long poles, and might get into difficulties. For the wind was rising. Once on the water, he became easy. One kind action was with him always a channel for another. And soon the torrent of his hospitality gushed forth, and he began doing the honors of Mao and persuading himself that he understood the wild procession, which increased in lights and sounds as the complications of its ritual developed. There was little need to row, for the freshening gale blew them in the direction they desired. Thorns scratched the keel, they ran into an islet and startled some cranes. The strange temporary life of the August flood water bore them up and seemed as though it would last forever. The boat was a rudderless dinghy, huddled up in the stern, with the spare pair of oars in his arms. The guest asked no questions about details. There was presently a flash of lightning, followed by a second flash, little red scratches on the ponderous sky. "Was that the Rajah?" he asked. What do you mean?" "Row back." "But there's no Rajah, nothing." "Row back, you will see what I mean." Aziz found it hard work against the advancing wind. But he fixed his eyes on the pin of light that marked the guest house and backed a few strokes. There, floating in the darkness, was a king, who sat under a canopy, in shining royal robes. "I can't tell you what that is, I'm sure," he whispered. "His Highness is dead. I think we should go back at once." They were close to the promontory of the tombs, and had looked straight into the chhatri of the Rajah's father through an opening in the trees. That was the explanation. He had heard of the image, made to imitate life at enormous expense, but he had never chanced to see it before, though he frequently rowed on the lake. There was only one spot from which it could be seen, and Ralph had directed him to it. Hastily he pulled away, feeling that his companion was not so much a visitor as a guide. He remarked, "Shall we go back now? There is still the procession." "I'd rather not go nearer, they have such strange customs, and might hurt you." "A little nearer." Aziz obeyed. He knew with his heart that this was Mrs. Moore's son, and indeed until his heart was involved he knew nothing. Radhe Krishna. Radhe Krishna. Radhe Krishna. Radhe Krishna. Krishna Radha. Went the chant, then suddenly changed. And in the interstice he heard, almost certainly, the syllables of salvation that had sounded during his trial at Chandrapur. "Mr. Moore, don't tell anyone that the Raju is dead. It is a secret still, I am supposed not to say. We pretend he is alive until after the festival, to prevent unhappiness. Do you want to go still nearer?" "Yes." He tried to keep the boat out of the glare of the torches that began to star the other shore. Rockets kept going off, also the guns. Suddenly, closer than he had calculated, the palanquin of Krishna appeared from behind a ruined wall, and descended the carven glistening water steps. On either side of it the singers tumbled, a woman prominent, a wild and beautiful young saint with flowers in her hair. She was praising God without attributes, thus did she apprehend him. Others praised him without attributes, seeing him in this or that organ of the body or manifestation of the sky. Down they rushed to the foreshore and stood in the small waves, and a sacred meal was prepared, of which those who felt worthy partook. Old Godbillay detected the boat, which was drifting in on the gale, and he waved his arms, whether in wrath or joy Aziz never discovered. Above stood the secular power of Mao, elephants, artillery, crowds, and high above them a wild tempest started, confined at first to the upper regions of the air. Gusts of wind mixed darkness and light, sheets of rain cut from the north, stopped, cut from the south, began rising from below, and across them struggled the singers, sounding every note but terror. And preparing to throw God away, God himself, not that God can be thrown, into the storm. Thus was he thrown year after year, and were others thrown, little images of Ganpati, baskets of 10-day corn, tiny tazias after Moharam, scapegoats, husks, emblems of passage, a passage not easy. Not now, not here, not to be apprehended except when it is unattainable. The God to be thrown was an emblem of that. The village of Gokul reappeared upon its tray. It was the substitute for the silver image, which never left its haze of flowers. On behalf of another symbol, it was to perish. A servitor took it in his hands, and tore off the blue and white streamers. He was naked, broad-shouldered, thin-waisted, the Indian body again triumphant. And it was his hereditary office to close the gates of salvation. He entered the dark waters, pushing the village before him, until the clay dolls slipped off their chairs and began to gutter in the rain, and King Kunsa was confounded with the father and mother of the Lord. Dark and solid, the little waves sipped, then a great wave washed, and then English voices cried, "Take care!" The boats had collided with each other. The four outsiders flung out their arms and grappled, and, with oars and poles sticking out, revolved like a mythical monster in the whirlwind. The worshippers howled with wrath or joy. As they drifted forward helplessly against the servitor, who awaited them, his beautiful dark face expressionless, and as the last morsels melted on his tray, it struck them. The shock was minute, but Stella, nearest to it, shrank into her husband's arms, then reached forward, then flung herself against Aziz, and her motions capsized them. They plunged into the warm, shallow water, and rose struggling into a tornado of noise. The oars, the sacred tray, the letters of Ronnie and Adela, broke loose and floated confusedly. Artillery was fired, drums beaten, the elephants trumpeted, and drowning all an immense peal of thunder, unaccompanied by lightning, cracked like a mallet on the dome. That was the climax, as far as India admits of one. The rain settled in steadily to its job of wetting everybody and everything through, and soon spoiled the cloth of gold on the palanquin and the costly disc-shaped banners. Some of the torches went out, fireworks didn't catch, there began to be less singing, and the tray returned to Professor Godbillay, who picked up a fragment of the mud adhering and smeared it on his forehead without much ceremony. Whatever had happened, and while the intruders picked themselves up, the crowds of Hindus began a desultory move back into the town. The image went back too, and on the following day underwent a private death of its own, when some curtains of magenta and green were lowered in front of the dynastic shrine. The singing went on even longer, ragged edges of religion, unsatisfactory and undramatic tangles. God is love. Looking back at the great blur of the last 24 hours, no man could say where was the emotional center of it, any more than he could locate the heart of a cloud. End of the chapter. Thank you. Thank you.